think we'll get started. I know a few more of you are going to be coming in as we get going. Good morning, everyone. My name is Frank Jaskulke. I am your VP of Innovation over here at Medical Alley, and I'm so pleased that you're joining us for another fun Ask Me Anything discussion, this time with Dr. Robert Wilson of Ag Medical, but we'll get into that in just a moment. A couple of things before we start. First off, I want to mention for any of the entrepreneurs who are on the call today, if your company is in need of any sort of help, if you're raising capital, you're trying to find people, you need service providers, always reach out to your Medical Alley team. We are here to be of service. And if you're out there, if you're looking for deal flow, maybe you're an investor, maybe you're a corporate looking for acquisitions, also reach out. There's an incredible community of startups that we're happy to plug you into. And this work wouldn't be possible, though, without the great support that we get from this community. I feel very blessed to have a great set of sponsors who have supported the Medical Alley Starts initiative, give us that extra capital to do better work, but also provide their services, provide their time to the startup community here in Medical Alley and around the world. And I'm joined by a couple of them today. I'm going to ask each of them to just tell you quickly a bit about their work, what they're up to. And what I'd ask you, the audience, to remember is that these are the organizations that are investing in your community. When you're out looking for help, they're a really good group of people and organizations to start with. And with that, Prem, I might start with you.
Thank you very much, Frank. Happy to be on a phone call. Good morning, everyone. My name is Prem Padhye, and I'm the Managing Director at AVO MedTech Consulting. AVO is a fractional services organization focused on helping medtech entrepreneurs and small businesses develop their technologies and their businesses. Our team is made up of subject matter experts who can support the critical needs of the product development journey, such as things like regulatory affairs, quality assurance, engineering, product development. And we also provide executive advisement and support for startup strategy by way of human resources, fractional CFO, and go-to-market types of questions and projects. What I think makes us unique is that much of our team not only has large medical device company experience, but startup experience as well. In fact, AVO, the genesis of AVO, was created to fulfill the needs of some local medtech entrepreneurs, including our founder, that were challenged in developing their own businesses and concepts to find the correct partners and the correct resources in many of the areas that I just mentioned. I think this grants our organization and our team the unique perspective and the ability also to empathize with many of the needs that startup entrepreneurs might be having. And it certainly ensures that our work and suggestions always make sense within that environment. If you'd like to know more, I'd love to speak with you or any of my team members to help understand more about what your business is and your technology is developing and how we might be able to partner on your journey from concept to commercialization to exit.
Prem, thank you. I really appreciate it. And then next, we'll have Bob from Frederickson and Byron.
Thank you, Frank. Hi, my name is Bob Day. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Frederickson and Byron in Minneapolis. I work in the area of patents. On behalf of Frederickson, I'd like to thank you for attending today's Medical Alley Starts Ask Me Anything series with Dr. Bob Wilson. A few words about Frederickson. Frederickson is proud to be a sponsor of Medical Alley Starts and Global Program. Our firm has been a long supporter of Medical Alley and of the startup ecosystem. Our lawyers have provided legal counsel to healthcare and life science companies for over 60 years in a variety of areas, ranging from healthcare regulations, mergers and acquisitions, to patents and everything in between, and at various stages of a company's growth, from startups to well-established companies. Frederickson is thrilled to have the opportunity to work with and support the talented and innovative entrepreneurs like Dr. Wilson that participate in the Medical Alley Starts and Global program. Thanks again for joining us. I hope you enjoyed today's program. Thank you.
Bob, I really appreciate it. And then Paul, I might ask you to say a few words.
Thank you, Frank, and good morning to everyone on the call. My name is Paul Carlson. I'm a manager in CLA's Healthcare and Life Science practice. And CLA is a national professional services firm, and we really exist to create opportunities for our clients, our people, and our communities. And we do that through industry-focused audit, tax, outsourcing, consulting, digital, and wealth advisory services. When you work with CLA, you get all of CLA, and that's all 8,000 employees across our 120 US locations, as well as our global network. For our healthcare and life science companies, and specifically those early stage companies, our outsourced accounting and fractional consulting services can really add value to those organizations to allow those entrepreneurs to focus on designing and developing their companies and those products. We provide scalable strategies for finance, accounting, human resources, all the way from the standard bookkeeping through executive functions. We're very excited to team up with Medical Alley and the Starts and Global program, and we are providing a discounted services for the first year of our working relationship with the company. And we really look forward to this, and we pride ourselves in working closely with those entrepreneurs and the business owners so that you can help preserve capital, manage, mitigate financial risk, and ultimately achieve the future that you envision for yourselves and the world of healthcare. Thank you, Frank.
Paul, I appreciate it. Yeah, and we really appreciate what you do to help conserve the capital of the companies. It makes life a lot easier. And with all that extra money you have, you might turn to our last gentleman, Mike Giedel from JP Morgan. I'll ask you to say a few words.
Thank you, Frank. Much appreciated. Good morning, everybody. My name is Mike Giedel. I am a managing director and head of our commercial banking, life sciences, and healthcare group across the Midwestern United States, the Intermountain region in Canada. Collectively, my team has over 100 years of experience working with early stage healthcare companies across the country. We bring network, we bring financial advisory, we bring additional financial opportunities for companies that are early seed stage all the way through commercialized organizations. We've been working with Frank and his team at the Medical Alley for a multiple of years and have enjoyed all of that. We've really enjoyed our sponsorship of Medical Alley Starts and the types of companies that the Medical Alley is working with and accelerating through what is an incredible ecosystem here in Minnesota, which I'm very proud to be a part of. We offer low-cost financial opportunities for companies who are looking to make their treasury services more efficient and their back office work more efficient, whether that be on the asset management side for capital that has just been raised, whether it's for existing cash that is being utilized for operational cash management purposes, or whether a need for debt financing is appropriate for a company in the early stages. We work across a multitude of venture capital firms, and you would be surprised to know that at JP Morgan, particularly my team, over 70% of the companies that we work with have no revenue and no profitability, which is atypical for a bank to be working with, but we do provide all of those types of services across the startup landscape and look forward to working with all of you. If you have any questions or comments or would like to get in touch with me or my team, please work with Frank and he will get you to us. Again, Frank, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to sponsor this.
Oh, we really appreciate it. And I have to say, I appreciate all the support we get from all of you, that you've demonstrated in words and deeds that you're invested in this community. It makes my work a lot easier. And I know for many of your clients, it makes their work a lot easier. We had one who couldn't join us today, our good friends from Nortech, fantastic contract producer, manufacturing and engineering firm, has long worked in the medical device space. Jay Miller, their CEO, is a 25-year member of Medical Alley, and they are glad to help in your manufacturing needs. For any of the organizations on here, if you want to get in touch with them, or if you have needs for other services, reach out to Medical Alley anytime. We'll get you in touch with them right away. With that, we're going to turn over to the core program, the reason you are here today. And one thing I want you to know as we're going through this, right? Title is Ask Me Anything. We've got the Q&A function set up. What I'd ask you to do as the audience is, as you have questions anytime, you don't got to wait till the end, type them in. I've got it up on my second screen, so if you see me turning my head, that's why I'm doing it. Throw your questions out there and I'll incorporate them into the conversation. Knowing that we're an audience of many good Minnesotans and you may not want to be first, you may not want to sit in the front, I've got some starter questions to get us going, and I'll remind you throughout that you can ask questions and we'll pull those in. And with that, we'll get started. And where I may start is just very simply, Dr. Wilson, would you just tell us a little bit about your history as an entrepreneur and as a clinician?
Oh, well, thanks. So first of all, it's an honor to be here. And Mike, I may be calling you later for money. So I'm an interventional cardiologist. I came to Minnesota in 1986 to develop the interventional program at the U. And in my fellowship, I had actually developed a medical device, a coronary Doppler catheter, which was in the early days of medical devices when I actually got an IDE by myself for this catheter. And then eventually, we tried to license this or sell this to industry. And, I was in Iowa City at the time, and honestly, nobody cared. Nobody wanted to go to Iowa City. I moved to the Twin Cities, and within 2 or 3 months, we had licensed the device off, which taught me a lesson about the importance of location and where you're at and having the right people around you and the right skill sets. And then I went on through a hallway conversation to develop the idea with a couple other people for the ACIST Medical Injection System, and started that company. And that was in about 1980. That was in 87, I think. And started that company in 91 as a C Corp. And then really kind of what I've learned is most of these companies, there's about 2 or 3 or 4 years of non-specific screwing around, where you don't know what the idea is, you don't understand the market, you don't understand the IP space, and you just have to and you don't even have the product really fully outlined. So don't spend too much money during that time, because that money is very dear, and you really need to spend it on cheap product development and yourself learning things. And the great things about Minnesota was, there's a lot of people to reach out to, and I had a lot of people that really helped a lot. They helped for free. There was one guy, Bob Van Tassel, who many people on the call will know, is also an interventionalist at Abbott. And, he took me to breakfast and would bring board books and kind of teach me how to run a board meeting and all these skill sets that, you generally don't have unless you've been through the pathway. We sold that in 2001. And then I stayed on and actually worked a lot with Bob Day at ACIST. And then we started another company, HLT Medical, which makes a transcatheter valve. We sold that in 2010. I stayed on and worked with those guys. And then in the end of 2014, early 2015, started Egg Medical, which is a company that's developing a radiation protection system, or has developed a radiation protection system to protect workers in hospital X-ray labs, the doctor, the nurse, the X-ray tech, who, most people don't realize are radiated every day of their life when they go to work and they put stents in people, or they do all these other X-ray guided procedures. And as you know, X-ray is being used much more commonly than it was in the past. And so this is an area which I really didn't know anything about. I just saw that as a need. And I would say all of the companies that I've had really were to address an unmet need that really was in kind of a backwater area. Nobody was thinking about injectors in, the 80s, 90s or 80s. Nobody was really thinking about transcatheter valve. We started this thing in 2001. And certainly until recently, nobody's been thinking about radiation protection and all the radiation that people get in hospital X-ray labs. So that's, in a nutshell, that's my story.
Oh, very interesting. And there's a couple of things I'm going to want to dig into there in what you said, especially the non-specific screwing around, because that's really important. But before that, so you started out as a physician. Yeah, you are a physician, but went into invention, innovation, startups. Why? What was that like pivot point for you?
Well, for most things, it was really something that I wanted to have that nobody was interested in making. And so, with the ACIST system, I thought it was a hassle the way that we did angiography. And I had a hallway conversation. I said, wouldn't it be great if you could just press a button and the contrast would come out and do the angiogram, and it'd be like a gas pump, basically, right, where everything's automated. And that's kind of how that started. But I would say the license to invent, I really got as a fellow at the University of Iowa. They had a great cardiovascular program, extremely well-funded, tons of research. And they had a couple of biomedical engineers that were attached to the cardiology division. And I worked with those guys to develop this Doppler catheter. And, you know, initially I would go test it. We would make a design. I would test it in animals. It would never work. And we would change the design. It would never work. Finally, I just said, hey, look, you know, I'm kind of embarrassed a little bit. I said, hey, just teach me how to build these things. And so they taught me how to microsolder and, you know, degas the epoxy and build these catheters basically. So I built it, and then I made one, you know, by accident that worked. And then, of course, we wanted to use it in people. And so then I kind of learned, I'll tell you about an FDA phone call I had, which was very interesting. So this is in the 80s, right? So I call them up, there's no internet then. And I said, hey, do I need an IDE to use this in people? And this woman on the other line says, well, you know, if you think you need an IDE, you definitely need an IDE. And if you don't think you need one, you might. And so that was kind of my introduction to the FDA. And then, you know, so I sent this stuff in and I got these 7 questions back, and the first 6 were technical. The 7th one was that you need to certify that you did all this stuff using GLP, good laboratory practices. Now, I had no idea what that was. And, you know, this is part of the learning phase, as you were saying. So I had no idea what that was. I go to the law library because, again, it's pre-internet, and I look up in the CFR these regulations, and, you know, I said, well, we didn't do any of this. So it's like, but so I just responded, and you could do this in the 80s. This is how it's so much more difficult now. I responded that we didn't follow GLP. We didn't use GLP exactly, but we followed the spirit of GLP, and they took it. They took it, and we got an IDE, and then so that kind of basically taught you the pathway from idea to at least getting regulatory approval and using it in humans. And that was an experience that everybody has to learn, and I was fortunate to learn it very early. But once you get that, you get the license to invent, and the next idea you have, you know, the pathway. And, you know, of course, we had a patent for this thing and all this other stuff. So, you know, I learned a lot about the patent system and also the people that you need to have around you to do things. So that's how I got to the point where, you know, you can have an idea and realizing you can make it happen.
Yeah, and I think something I want to emphasize for the audience in what you shared, that license to invent, that in Iowa, the university had sort of an environment that was encouraging it. Then you mentioned Dr. Van Tassel and his kind of mentorship and help. You know, I would say to the audience, like, that I think is one of the hallmarks of this industry and of this community in particular, of the people who have that knowledge and experience being willing to help the next generation of entrepreneurs, leaders, whatever it might be. As you're now on your 3rd company, I imagine you've learned lots of things along the way. You know, what would you say to our audience of like, hey, here are a couple of things that now, having done this a number of times, I think about different, like you thought about differently maybe when you started Egg versus your first company?
Yeah. So the first was what I mentioned before, and that is the importance of early cash management and really not spending money until you're ready to spend money on something that's really important, because that early cash is critical. The second thing is just going to the IP space right away. And, you know, you can do a lot of searching yourself, or you can hire Bob Day or somebody like that to do that, but finding a good IP attorney, and particularly one that can work with you and not, you know, because they're expensive, right? And so some people work with you earlier on, and you know, you won't have to spend quite as much money. And you need to find an IP person also that is in your space. You don't want to pay to educate them in your space. You want them to already know this. So the IP management, I think, is important. And then the next thing is really understanding the market. And so what I did with Egg, which I didn't do with the other companies, was I went out and asked people. I went to 30 cath labs around the world, and I said, here's what we're thinking now. And it turns out the product we were thinking about, which was we may eventually do, but we didn't do that product. What we did was an offshoot of that product, which was radiation protection, because when I asked people about radiation protection, everybody's eyes lit up. I mean, it was like amazing, like by the 4th person, you know, you didn't even have to go to another 26 because everybody responded exactly the same. And so that was eye-opening for me, because it can really guide and, you know, obviously early is a lot easier than late if you're going to do a pivot on product design and the like.
Oh yeah, very much. I'm seeing a parallel here. We do a lot of work in the digital health space, and one of our board members talks about, he calls it the half-baked problem of a startup has an idea and they spend too many resources developing it up front before getting that, you know, prospective customer feedback. And if they find out they're wrong, they no longer have the resources to pivot or adapt or adjust. I'm hearing you say, go out early, get that input before you're locking the thing in,
Right.
and you can avoid that.
Right. And it's kind of painful sometimes, right? Because you hear things that you do not want to hear. And so you've got to be able to accept that. And also you have to be able to filter the input a little bit too, right? Because sometimes, you get input that's related to somebody that doesn't really thinking far ahead, like you're trying to think ahead. So you have to use it with a grain of salt. But yes, that early input is critical to spending the dollars wisely.
Yeah. And folks, I'll mention we've got some questions coming in. Keep them coming. I've got them pulled up and we'll integrate them throughout the conversation. One thing I wanted to ask you about, we get approached by a number of young physicians every year who they're interested in this space. They're thinking about ideas they have. What might you say to another doctor who's thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, things that maybe are uniquely about the physician community?
Yeah. Well, I think for physicians, they need to develop the skill set that's needed to take the idea to a product. And that's not the same skill set as in medicine. And you kind of have to take the doctor hat off when you do that. So the advantage that they have is they're in the market, they are the market, and their insight into need is oftentimes much greater than most people. So they have that huge, and I have that huge advantage. I always tell people I'm a really average device user. So, so it's really, it's pretty good, but you got to understand the market size. So you may have a product that's super important, but honestly, it's just from an economic standpoint, it's never going to make it, right? So understanding how to estimate the market size on the back of an envelope from the number of ends and the price and, the usual stuff, that's a critical piece. And understanding the economics of development. So, somebody might say, well, I can make this I can sell it for $100, I think, and I can make it for 80. So I'm going to make $20 on each one. And obviously that doesn't work, right? There's like these industry norms, and they're in norms for a reason. So understanding the economics of development, manufacturing, sale, how much sales cost. And then you have to get a little respect for the sales organization too, because a lot of doctors don't have a lot of respect for sales. They just think they're kind of useless conduits to get to the product that they need. And, after a while, you begin to realize that this is a real skill set, and it's an important skill set because it also gives you market feedback as well as giving you the ability to project your product out into the market. So kind of understanding the sales piece is important. And then, on the business side, people will help you with that. People in this town and Minneapolis and across the country really are business people are incredibly helpful with giving their time to help younger people kind of develop the business savvy and the business skills. And you have a lawyer, right? If you have a good lawyer, they're going to help you with that as well. But I would say expanding the skill set beyond medicine to the IP space, to the sales space, understanding the market, and then understanding kind of the general development path and what the economics are for most things.
Indeed. I want to shift for a moment to talk a little bit about Ag Medical and the work you're doing. And we got a question from the audience related to that, where they asked that as you were getting feedback from the cath labs, as you were, in the early stages of what became Ag Medical, how did you protect IP when you're having those sorts of conversations, or how did you manage that?
Well, we'd already filed almost all the IP, at least in provisional, but I think mostly in full up form for the general concept type stuff. So wasn't so concerned about that. And I think some people can be so tight on it is important not to disclose things, obviously, but you can be so tight on it, so wary about it, that you really stilt those discussions. You don't really get a discussion. And, when you shove a non-disclosure thing in front of somebody you don't even know, and they're going to talk to you for 30 minutes and they're doing you a favor by talking to you, that's not great for the conversation. And then some people say, well, now you need to pay me to talk to me, and, et cetera. So I don't worry so much. I just try and file as much stuff up front as possible to cover what we're going to talk about. And I don't go into great detail. I'm really more interested in what they're saying to me. So, is this thing a need for you? Is this a need for you? What do you think the value of this would be? And I'll give you an example just for the egg stuff. So we had a mat that was going to be electrified and basically be able to do all the vitals and everything. You just plug in the mat instead of putting all these wires all over patients. That was kind of the fundamental idea. And in the patent, we had something about radiation protection. And I think thanks to Bob Day, actually. And so that was just a question I would ask. And as I said before, when I hit that question, the eyes lit up. But the first stuff, you know, they weren't that thrilled about. You know, they were saying, well, yeah, it'd be kind of nice to have. I'd like to have it. You know, how much is it worth to you? Well, maybe $5,000, you know, and you go, well, economically, that's not going to work. So I don't worry so much about the IP stuff as long as you have it covered early in broad form, and don't ask really specific questions.
Yeah, and I think I'm hearing you even say you're really asking them about problems they have more than like the nitty-gritty details of your product.
Yeah, right. Is this an issue for you? Do you think this is
Yeah.
valuable? Do you need a solution? Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So maybe let's back up for a moment. Could you tell the audience what is AG Medical? Like, what are you doing?
Oh, well, thank you very much. So, you know, I work in a cardiac cath lab. Most people that work there every day. These are the places where image-guided therapy is using X-ray is used. So, you know, placement of cardiac stents, peripheral vascular stents, angiograms, transcatheter valve replacement. All of this uses X-ray to guide the procedure. The X-ray comes from below the patient, comes out of a tube, and there's a detector on the front that takes the picture. What most people don't know is that only about 1% to 2% of what comes out of that tube actually ends up in the detector. The other 98, 99% is either absorbed by the patient or it's reflected by the patient. And that creates this big cloud of scatter radiation in the room. Everybody's standing there. Now they're wearing a lead apron, right? Which are heavy. Lead apron covers about 60% of your body. The rest of it's not covered. There's additional shielding in the room, but you know, it hasn't changed in 50 years and it's not that effective. So, you know, if you want to know what happens after 30 years of radiation exposure, you got to wait 30 years. And what we know now is that there's about 3 times the incidence of cancer in those people. We have a lot of people in Minneapolis who have radiation related cancers from working in those labs. It's about 6 times the incidence of cataracts. We had a nurse in the lab that had, was in her 40s, that had a double cataract surgery. Was a very close talker to patients, got a lot of radiation in the face likely. So this is a big problem, right? And it's a problem that hasn't had any movement in 50 years. And so when we started this, we said, we're going to make a radiation shielding system that works with the workflow. So it doesn't get in the way of what you do, but it drops the dose in the room by 90%, not just for the doctor, but for everybody in the room. And so that's what we've accomplished. And we're going now to our next system, which will be a 99% reduction in scatter radiation for the operator and the person next to the operator. They won't have to wear lead, I don't think. Now, you know, you talk about, I didn't mention the regulatory framework. You have to learn the regulatory framework too, which is probably more illogical than the rest of them. And, you know, the regulatory framework for radiation protection is actually not with the federal government in the United States, it's with the states. And every state has their own set of rules. And every state, you know, is different in terms of how rational they are. So some states don't want to talk about any rule changes. Other states are very open to it. So that's probably one of the hurdles that we'll have to go across. But some states like California, Arizona, pretty good. Minnesota's pretty tough. So you know, we'll have to go state by state to see where we're at. But the goal is really to get people out of those lead aprons and to reduce the radiation exposure to a negligible level so we don't see these cancers and cataracts and all the other illnesses that befall people that work in these labs. And remember, X-ray is being used a lot more, right? Everybody wants a big operation with a little tiny hole. And so, you know, that's image guided. And so ortho, GI, pulmonary, vascular surgery, obviously cardiology, interventional radiology, all of those specialties now are going to image-guided therapy. And that means that the number of people that get radiated are growing a lot. And it's not just in the US, it's a worldwide issue.
That's very interesting. And I had no idea about the volume of the radiation that then the staff and the patient would be exposed to, and especially over someone's career, how much that could be. I think for a lot of our audience, they often think about, say, like procedure innovation, new devices, products that might end up being reimbursable, and that's kind of call it the standard economic model.
Yeah.
This kind of product, What is the commercial side of it like for this kind of product? It seems like it would be different from what many in our audience might normally think about in device.
Yeah, I would say most of Minneapolis is built on disposables. And so it's a reimbursable disposable. The plus side is that, the hospital gets reimbursed for it. So it's a positive for them. The downside is you have to get a reimbursement code. And also those devices can be replaced pretty quickly, right? So you have a stent, it's a great stent, and then somebody comes out with a better stent tomorrow, and you don't sell anything the next day. With this kind of product, and I would put ACIST in the same category as this, it's more like the hardware and disposables are used for every procedure. They're not reimbursed, they're part of the procedure charge, so you don't have to get a reimbursement code, which is positive. The negative is, part of that comes out of capital budgets, but hospitals spend in capital budgets. That's part of what their business model is. So not having to have a reimbursement code is great. Also, the displacement factor, you're not easily displaced once you're in as a capital item. The next day, they're not going to use somebody else's widget. So an ACIST is the same way. First company is the same way. It comes with a piece of hardware that's expensive, and then a disposable that churns every case. So you kind of have the razor blade model, and egg will eventually be the razor blade a little bit as well, because it'll need a disposable for that 99% protection. But I would say, it's harder to get in, but once you're in, you're in. And from an economic model, it works out very well.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. Like the understanding some of the trade-offs and the different ways of innovating within that. And we've had a couple of questions pop up to this. People are always curious about the capital raising side. So one question that had come in, Terry was asking, how do you think about early capital and raising as much money as you can, or just enough to get to the next milestone? How do you think about that? Like,
so this is the age-old question, right? So there's a guy in town, Norm Dan, who always used to say,
Norm.
Yeah, so Norm is great, and Norm, maybe you probably heard this from him. Then he would always say, no good idea ever went undeveloped because it had too much money. And so, don't skimp on the money in the early part. On the other hand, the early money is the most dear money, and your multiple is going to be the worst for that. The amount of company you're going to have to sell off to do that is going to be the greatest. I think the first thing to do is, getting back to that non-specific screwing around time. Don't spend money during that time. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can get done on the cheap, and you should do as much of that as possible. And from an IP standpoint, you should try and write as much of your patent as you can, because you'll save a lot of IP money. Plus, you might get a little better work product out of that, because you understand it probably better than the attorney does. So doing all that work in the front as cheaply as possible is very important. But you are going to get to a point where it's got to become a company. And at that point, I think that's right. I think raising more money than you need, typically you're going to need 2 to 3 times whatever your business plan says you're going to need, and there's going to be a little bit of failure along the way. So finding a friendly money can be probably the most important thing. And of course, you're going to have to put your own time and money into it as well. Nobody's going to invest in you if you're not invested and usually you got to be invested to the point where it hurts a little bit and where you can't walk away. So they know that that you're not going to walk away from the project if a problem occurs. But I would say raising money early, within reason, is probably bigger is better.
Yeah, and maybe then a follow-up on that. What have you found over time, as you talk to the investors? Were there things as you went through your entrepreneurial journey where you realized you thought they were important, turned out they weren't, or you thought they were unimportant, turned out they were important, as far as the investment community is concerned?
Yeah, I would say the technical aspects of the development they don't care about, at least in my experience. What they care about is, who can I call that's going to tell me this is a good idea? And so you need to have some references that are friendly references who are credible people. I'm not going to tell them, if something's not true, but people who can put it in context that, so they'll have a technical reference for that people want it, like the market, there is a place in the market for it, that this seems to fit that place in the market. The second thing is, obviously they're betting on the management team. And so having people that have some experience on the management team and a track record is important. But early on, like my first company, where am I going to find those people? They're not going to work with me probably. So you do have to find the people like the Bob Van Tassels and other people, because who can really help you in this journey to try and build a company. And you're going to have to find people that are probably a little less experienced, but having experienced people around you, helping you with selecting and recruiting probably more commonly, because, the other problem is that, if you're a first-time entrepreneur, people don't want to work with you. I mean, it's too much. Well, maybe they just don't want to work with me, but there's just, there's too much risk involved in it. And so getting other people to help you with the recruiting, I think is important. And the market size and being able to show the market size is super, super, super important. And so to do that, you've got to have credible sources. You don't have to. I think people are less concerned with the technical details and more concerned with, is there really a market for this thing? And does it fill a market need, et cetera? And so being able to build the financial case for the market and how you're going to build that company out. And again, there are a lot of people that can help you with that. And then finally, the IP. You got to file IP. You cannot raise serious money without having your IP filed. And I don't think. And I remember one time, it's probably a Norm Dan thing also. So he looks at me and he says, he's got a piece of paper in his hand, my little, description. And he says, so you're telling me this piece of paper is worth $1 million. Is that what you're telling me? And like, yeah, well, yes, kind of, that is what I'm telling you, right? So, but it's got to be filed.
For those out there who don't know or know Norm Dan, if you ever get the chance to meet him, he is the sharpest person in medical device, a wonderful human, and a big reason that the community that we know and love is here. I mean, yeah, Norm is fantastic. One comment I make on something you said about the technology piece, I have a good friend who worked in the biotech industry. She would always say, assume the science works, so what? That was like her question to every entrepreneur. Yeah. We've got a question from the audience that I want to highlight that you would, I think, answered. Person was asking about, like, where do you go to learn the ropes? And for the audience out there, hey, if you're a first-time entrepreneur, what Dr. Wilson said about finding those people who can help you, give that advice, give that perspective, they are out there. You got to do a bit of hustling to track them down, but also reach out to me, reach out to Philip and Kyle if you know them. A lot of what we're doing with Starts is connecting with first-time entrepreneurs as early as we can find you, because there's this incredible community in Medical Alley that they want to help, they want to share their time, and they know not everyone spent 30 years at Medtronic has that network pre-built. So if you're looking for that sort of help, reach out, we got you. One more question that had come in. Person had asked about hospital administrators that have shared cath lab leadership. They can say no to everything and yes to nothing or some things. How do you think scatter radiation and mitigation of it is playing, or how is it playing out with the chief administrator, with the different administrators in an environment where hospital budgets seem to be quite constrained? Like, do you find they're interested in this, or what's that commercial challenge that you guys are confronting?
Well, it's a grayscale. It really depends on how concerned they are about employee safety. So one of the things in healthcare that's a little different from other industries is that not a lot of money goes into employee safety, despite what people say. So, if you get a needle stick in a hospital, that's your fault. And you're a bad person because you got a needle stick. You should have been more careful. If you get run over by a forklift at FedEx, it's FedEx's fault. So, it's a different mindset. Everything's directed at the patient and the safety of the patient. Employee safety has always been oftentimes a secondary thing. Now, the nurses unions are changing that. The nurses, patient transfer stuff, where they don't want to hurt their backs and all this stuff. They've kind of put that into law. Now we're into regulation. And this is another aspect of employee safety for hospital workers that really needs to get addressed. And, you might say, where are the feds on this? I mean, really, OSHA should be involved in this. It's a clear problem. And OSHA does have a lot of white papers on it. And they say, this is a problem, but it doesn't look like there's a solution. And so you should use as little X-ray as possible. So, but now there is a solution. And like with many problems, if there's no solution, nobody cares about the problem. but now there is a solution. And what's reasonably possible in terms of protection with the egg system has changed. It's 10% of the dose of what they were getting before. So I think in a lot of hospital administrators, the importance of employee protection, employee retention. It's hard to, as you know, have a hard time recruiting nurses and techs. They're using a lot of travelers, which are super expensive. And so this is one more hook to get people in. There's going to be a shortage of interventional cardiologists, interventional radiologists coming, another hook. And what we're finding is that the young physicians, and particularly the women physicians, are really pushing this because they don't want to get cancer. They're earlier in their career. And our new version, which will have no lead, the older guys are pushing that because they're tired of wearing lead and they got bad backs from it and all this other stuff. So there's a lot of push from the physician and the nurse and the tech community. Some administrators, obviously do want to take care of their people. And then there also have been a number of lawsuits recently against hospitals where people got cancer from their radiation exposure. And as that industry begins to increase, and at some point there'll probably be a class action suit related to this, that makes the economics different for the hospital as well. So it's changing, but you hit the nail on the head, whoever the questioner is, about hospital administration. They are probably our biggest sell point for this. We don't have to sell docs and nurses. They want the protection. We've just got to get it up through the system. And I think hospital budgets are getting better than they were last year. And we've had great success this year. So I'm very optimistic about, this is just going to become the standard of care, right? At some point, everybody's going to have advanced radiation protection systems. How can they not? How can they not? I mean, how can you have people being radiated every day? It's like asbestos, right? It took a while for that to catch. And now, they're crazy about asbestos, but it's just, we're in that period of time where people are engaging.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that period of time with us and with the audience here today. I think this is a great point to wrap it up and say thank you for sharing the insights, your experience, and a little bit of what you got up to today with Egg Medical. Thank you for being here.
It's a great pleasure. Thank you very much for asking me.
And folks, I hope you enjoyed the event. Again, if you're out there, if you're an entrepreneur, you need help, reach out to Medical Alley Starts. We're here for you anytime. Have a great day.